Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Hot Rod Bob, and you've got gas, the morning edition. How are you doing this morning? Anybody there? Well, we don't see anyone here yet, so I'm going to just kind of babble around and maybe move the camera just a little bit. Ah, there we go. That looks a little bit better. Now the mirror's not in the way. There we go. Hi, Jay Black. How are you doing this morning? Hey, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to talk about MOPARs. And what I'm going to talk about specifically is their Slant 6, or the G motor, as it was called internally. Now, we called it the Slant 6. I'm going to tilt this just a little bit more here. There we go. Now, still playing with it. But I'm kind of a nutcase for oddball engines. My Plymouth was powered by a flathead 6 for a number of years, and I've had a number of other vehicles, including one of these famous flathead or overhead valve Slant 6s. I had one in a 1964 Dodge Dart GT that I had, and the owner had upgraded it to something called the Hyper Pack. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. In 1959, Chrysler needed a new engine. The Flathead 6 had run its course. It had been in production since the 20s or 30s, and it was getting a little tired. It wasn't producing the horsepower. It was heavy. It was tall. It took up a lot of space in the engine compartment, and although Chrysler had various versions of that six-cylinder flathead engine, it was dated, it was old, and people were getting away from that flathead configuration. As a matter of fact, Chrysler was probably one of the longest runners of a flathead engine, all the way through 1959. So in 1960, they came out with the Slant 6, as we called them on the street, and it was sitting at a 30-degree angle inside the engine bay. Now, this was not really all that unusual, because in 1952, Mercedes-Benz had come up with their own six-cylinder, and they put it in their 300 SL, leaning it over 30 degrees so they could have a lower hood line. Now, this also allowed Chrysler, in their attempt, to put the water pump over to the side of the engine that was tilted. This way, it gave it more room. The engine was not quite as long. Now, the initial engine was 170 cubic inches. It was cast iron, typical cast iron head, cast iron block. Then the 225 was introduced. Now, the 225 was earmarked for the larger cars. The 170 was for the Dodge Lancer and the Plymouth Valiant. Now, you got to remember, for you Chrysler guys, the Lancer was the first Dodge compact, not the Dodge Dart. So in 1959, at the introduction of the 1960 models, two Slant six-cylinder engines came out, the 225 being a little bit taller. It was used in primarily the full-size cars, and at that point in time, the Dodge Dart was a full-size Dodge. Hi, Neil. How are you doing this morning? Sam Brown's. Don't worry, these little six-cylinders won't give you much. Gustavo says, what do you think about alcohol on drag racing? Well, we've had the alcohol, or air-cooled in drag racing, not alcohol. Sorry, I got my mind switched here. What's wrong with air-cooled? They're great. All right, Jay Black says he had a 62 Valiant with over 200,000 miles because that Slant 6 was a very reliable engine. Now, strangely enough, even with the amount of power it was able to put out and its excellent reliability, it was only a 4-main bearing engine. But those main bearings were the same size, and rod bearings were the same size as the Chrysler 426 Hemi. So that gives you an idea that these journals, these bearing surfaces, were amazingly strong. They worked in a Hemi. Here's a little six-cylinder with 1/4 of the horsepower, and they would last forever. Now, that Slant 6 was in production from 1959 in the U.S., through the early 80s, but it stopped being used in cars earlier on because of emission standards. Now, let me see where I can find this again. Okay. Although it stayed in production until 2000, it was used in marine use, it was used in industrial use, it was used in trucks. That's where it stayed for the majority of its life. The six-cylinder went away for car use when Chrysler started switching over to front-wheel drive cars. The six-cylinder was just too long and too heavy to be used at that. Now, there were three configurations of this Slant 6. There was the 170 that came out in 1959, the 225 that came out in 1959, and around the years of the last Slant 6s, the Plymouth and the Volare issues, or the mid-size cars, got a 198 cubic inch Slant 6. It's kind of an oddball engine, didn't last quite as long as the 225s and the 170s. Now, performance-wise, they were good for the street. But in the early 1960s, NASCAR came up with a compact class, and the compact class required the use of a six-cylinder engine. No one had anything of any significance. I mean, yeah, Chevrolet had their stove bolt, Ford had their little six cylinders in the Falcons. But one of the restrictions or problems with those earlier six cylinders, and even today's inline six cylinders, was the intake manifolds. Carburetor sat in the middle and had a long runner, but each runner going into the manifold was very short. Uneven fuel distribution was the issue. With the Slant 6 design, Chrysler was able to put almost equal length runners. So 6 and 1 matched, 5 and 2 matched, 4 and 3 matched. It gave better torque, it gave better performance for the six-cylinder. And in 1960, at the NASCAR compact race, with the 225 cubic inch sixes, Chrysler ran away and hid from the competition. Plymouth Valiants had the top 8 positions, dominated the first year, dominated the second year, and, well, NASCAR disbanded the class after that. Now, to come up with this performance version of the six-cylinder, Chrysler came up with what they called was the Hyper Pack. And I had a 1964 Dodge that had the Hyper Pack. Now, that was not a factory-installed option package. It was installed by the dealer. You bought it over the parts counter. You could install it if you wanted, but it was a part kit that you'd buy over the counter. It used longer runners on the intake manifold. It had a exhaust manifold with dual exhaust, so you had 3 going into one at front and rear of the engine. It had a higher lift cam. It had an AFB style carburetor, an AFB carburetor, and on the 225 cubic inch 6, it put out an amazing 225 horsepower. Now, those were in the days of brake horsepower. So 225 horse out of 225 cubic inches was very impressive. And they were pretty stout little six-cylinder motors. As everyone knows, they were reliable as can be. And with that extra horsepower, they were even quicker. They started out with low compression, and with the Hyper Pack, they came up with a little bit more compression and more power. Now, that Hyper Pack assembly is available through aftermarket suppliers at this point. Chrysler gave up on the kit, basically, and turned it over to some, other people copied it, and it's available as an aftermarket component. There's a place here in Southern California that has pretty much everything you need to make yourself a duplicate Hyper Pack. It includes the cast iron exhaust manifolds, although most people would go to a header system of tubular. It's lighter in weight and better heat dissipation. The only downside to the Slant 6-cylinder design was it wasn't a cross-flow cylinder head. And for real performance, a cross-flow tends to work a little bit better. That is, the intake is on one side, the exhaust is on the opposite side. The Slant 6 didn't lend itself to that because of its proximity on the cylinder head to the fender well, where it's slanted over. So the exhaust and the intake were both on the same side, which really wasn't that bad. It produced the horsepower it needed. Now, the only one that came up with a performance six-cylinder at all from the domestics to compete was Pontiac, and they had the overhead cam six-cylinder in the Firebird and the Tempest, but that was not until 1967. So Chrysler was well ahead of them with that little Slant 6. Now, there was one variation. And in the early days, there was a 225 cubic inch aluminum block six-cylinder. They didn't last very long. And basically the reasoning on that was the cylinders were of a pressed-in steel. They would delaminate or start moving around in the block. could create a problem. There was also an issue with, in those days, antifreeze was not something people utilized during the summertime. A lot of people say, I don't need antifreeze, it's summer, it's hot. Well, it is an anti-rust agent as well. It keeps engines from rusting, and in the case of the aluminum block, it prevents some of the electrolysis corrosion that happens on aluminum components. Well, that didn't work. People switched over to straight water, and problems ensued. GM had a similar issue with their aluminum V8s they came out with in the Buick Special and the Oldsmobile Cutlass back in the early 60s. But the Hyperpack was an interesting variation. 4-barrel carburetor, long runners on the intake, cast iron header with 2 dual ports going out of 3 to 3, 3 on one side, 3 on the other side, into a Y piece that went into a single exhaust. It came with a larger muffler as well, higher lift cam. They recommended it only be used on manual transmissions because it had a higher idle to be smooth. So that's one of the things that happened to that. The Slant 6 stayed in production for many years, and even in Argentina, they continued production on that motor through 2000. But they added a little twist. They made an intake manifold with 2 1-barrel carburetors for a little extra performance. Again, don't forget, outside the United States, the emission control issues were not a problem. They don't exist at the time. Now Europe has moved up to that, but most other countries still do not have the emission standards or requirements that we have on engines. So that engine stayed in production for quite some time. Now there was another variation of this motor. It wasn't a Slant though, and that was in Australia, where they got a 265 cubic inch Hemi 6-cylinder. I'm not sure how much horsepower it put out, but it was available in 215, 245, and 265 cubic inch displacements, putting out some good horsepower. And I know in the case of Ford and Holden, they had some pretty stout 6-cylinders down there. So the Slant 6, very desirable engine. Would I like another one in a car? As a daily driver, yeah, I think I could. I would. As a matter of fact, I just looked at a Valiant the other day. It had the 170 in it, and although it had all the go fast and go fun goodies, plus a 5-speed transmission hooked up to it, it just didn't have the torque and the feeling of power that the 225 cubic inch has, and I needed that. I kind of like that. Yep, Corey Weaver, that little 6-cylinder is a little hard to kill motor, and they run pretty good. We've got a guy that comes out to Irwindale occasionally with one, and it runs pretty stout. He's right there with the V8 cars, and he's got a Hyperpack type system on his car. I don't remember the name of the company here in Southern California. Oh, Clifford Research. Clifford sells basically the Hyperpack kit, and you can get the manifold, the camshaft, the exhaust, and everything you need to just about replicate what the factory system was. So Clifford Engineering in Southern California, they have those components and works pretty good. All right, so that's your 6-shot report. 6 in a row makes them go. It's Hot Rod Bob. I'm glad you joined me today. It's kind of a normal day for me. I gave you some facts and some information, and I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you like the information. We'll try and cover some technical stuff from time to time, just for the sake of giving you information. I hope you liked it. Hi, Gino Furiani. How are you doing today? I haven't responded to many people there. Been talking too much. Me, imagine that, talking too much. Okay. All right, Thursday we're going to go racing. It's Irwindale again. It's going to be a great night of racing action. Hope to see a bunch of you out there. Got no car shows planned for the next few days anyway. I got a couple of car club events during the week. We'll be going to the early V8 Ford Car Club meeting this evening, and we'll see all our friends there. Yes, I'm bilingual when it comes to cars. We own Chrysler products, we own Ford products, we own Chevrolets, and Ford, Chrysler, Chevy. We got them all. Well, all the big three. One of the things I might talk about later in this week is the demise of the Nash and the Hudsons. Yes, those were names of cars. They formed American Motors back in the mid-1950s. We'll talk about them a little bit later on. All right, guys, you have a great day. I'm going to try. I've got a lot of stuff to do. I got to get ready for the Ford Club meeting tonight, and got to do my honey-do list around the house. Yep. Oh, yeah. Well, keeps me busy and out of trouble. You people have a great day. Thank you for tuning into GAAS. Please let your friends know about GAAS, the Great American Auto Scene. Have them like the GAAS page, GAAS, G-A-A-S, on Facebook. Now, although you're watching this on my Facebook page, Bob Beck, that's only because we find more people watch that and more associate with it, but the show gets shared, or the Morning GAAS gets shared to GAAS and a bunch of other sites. Now, if you're interested in the 6 cylinders, there is a Facebook page for that, Slant 6 Daily. Check them out. I'm Hot Rod Bob. You've got GAAS, the morning edition. You have a great day. Thanks to Valley Head Service, Irwindale Speedway, Irwindale Drag Strip, Beach Underwriting Associates, and Santa Pond Raceway. You have a great day. Keep it rubber side down and shiny side up. I'm Hot Rod Bob. Take care now.